Every single day, millions of people wake up, pour a cup of coffee, and hope for a miracle, more energy, more focus, more productivity. But here's the truth. Caffeine is not just a morning ritual. It's a powerful neurochemical tool. And if you learn how to use it correctly, it can dramatically improve your mental clarity, reaction time, and ability to enter deep focus. I'm not here to sell you coffee. I'm here to show you the science and the protocol to make it work for your brain, not against it. Because used improperly, caffeine can lead to anxiety, crashes, and even long-term cognitive issues. But used strategically, it becomes one of the most effective and accessible performance-enhancing tools on Earth. Today, I'll show you exactly how to do that. Pause for effect, eye contact with audience. Let's talk about how to use caffeine, not casually but deliberately, to unlock deep focus and mental performance. Most people wake up and reach for their first cup of coffee within minutes of opening their eyes. It feels intuitive, you're groggy, your brain is foggy, and you want to feel alert and ready for the day. But from a neuroscience perspective, this habit is actually working against your brain's natural rhythms. When you wake up in the morning, your body begins a cascade of biological processes designed to promote natural alertness. Chief among these is the release of cortisol, a hormone that helps regulate wakefulness, metabolism, and your internal clock. Cortisol levels naturally peak within 30 to 60 minutes after waking. This is your body's own built-in alertness system, and it's extremely effective on its own if you give it a chance. When you immediately consume caffeine upon waking, you're not enhancing this process, you're competing with it. Caffeine doesn't replace the function of cortisol. Instead, it interacts with the same receptors and can blunt your body's natural production of it over time. What that means is, by taking caffeine too early, you're actually reducing your long-term ability to wake up feeling alert without it. You begin to rely more on caffeine and less on your body's natural neurochemistry, leading to dependency, tolerance, and the inevitable crash that many people experience in the early afternoon. Additionally, caffeine works primarily by blocking adenosine, a molecule in the brain that builds up while you're awake and contributes to sleepiness. When you wake up, adenosine levels are already relatively low. Your body cleared a good amount of it during sleep. If you flood your brain with caffeine right away, you're not getting the full benefit of adenosine suppression because there isn't much adenosine to block yet. What you're doing is borrowing stimulation from later in the day. The result is a rebound effect, where the suppressed adenosine comes rushing back stronger once the caffeine wears off, leading to the dreaded afternoon slump, irritability, and loss of focus. The better strategy, the neuroscience-aligned strategy, is to wait 90 to 120 minutes after waking before consuming caffeine. This gives your body time to naturally elevate cortisol, set your circadian rhythm properly, and create a foundation of energy that doesn't rely on stimulants. Then, when you do consume caffeine, you'll feel a more pronounced effect because your brain is primed to receive it. You'll experience increased alertness, improved reaction time, and enhanced cognitive focus without the sharp crash that usually follows early caffeine intake. Over time, this approach has a compounding effect. Your body becomes more efficient at regulating its own wakefulness, your dependence on caffeine lessens, and your overall energy becomes more stable and predictable throughout the day. You're no longer using caffeine as a crutch, you're using it as a tool, and like any tool, the key is knowing when to use it and when to let your body do what it's designed to do. Caffeine is one of the most widely consumed psychoactive substances on the planet, but most people have no idea how much they're actually consuming, or how much they should be. The dose of caffeine you take in matters enormously when it comes to its effects on focus, mood, energy levels, and even sleep. Too little, and you might not feel any noticeable boost in alertness. Too much, and you can experience anxiety, restlessness, heart palpitations, irritability, and even cognitive impairment, essentially the opposite of the focused, productive state you're aiming for. From a neuroscience and performance standpoint, the optimal range for most adults is typically between 100 to 200 milligrams of caffeine per dose. This range tends to produce a noticeable increase in alertness and concentration without triggering the overstimulation that comes with excessive intake. To put that into perspective, a standard 8-ounce cup of coffee contains roughly 80 to 100 milligrams of caffeine, although this can vary greatly depending on the type of beans, the brewing method, and the serving size. Energy drinks, on the other hand, can contain anywhere from 80 to over 300 milligrams in a single can. Some popular cold brews and specialty lattes contain upwards of 250 milligrams per serving without consumers even realizing it. The issue with high doses of caffeine is that its effects on the brain and nervous system are non-linear. Beyond a certain point, the benefits plateau and the side effects begin to take over. That's because caffeine stimulates the central nervous system by blocking adenosine, an inhibitory neurotransmitter that promotes relaxation and sleepiness. When you block adenosine in moderate amounts, you feel more awake, more focused, and more motivated. But in high doses, the blockade becomes excessive, and the brain interprets this as a state of emergency. Stress hormones like adrenaline and cortisol are released in larger amounts, and instead of feeling clear-headed and alert, you begin to feel jittery, reactive, and anxious. Moreover, the brain adapts to frequent high levels of caffeine by downregulating its sensitivity. This means that over time, you'll need more caffeine to achieve the same effect. This is known as tolerance, and it can quickly spiral into a cycle where you're consuming more and more caffeine just to feel normal, not to mention the withdrawal symptoms, headaches, brain fog, fatigue that come when you miss a dose. Another often overlooked factor is individual sensitivity. People metabolize caffeine at different rates, depending on their genetics, liver enzyme function, and even their hormonal state. Some individuals can drink a double espresso at 9 p.m. and fall asleep with no issue. Others feel overstimulated and anxious from half a cup of coffee in the morning. This is why it's critical to experiment and find your own optimal dose, rather than blindly following what others are doing or what's marketed as standard. A good starting point is to stay within that 100 to 200 milligram range, and then observe how your body and mind respond, how your focus changes, how your mood shifts, how your sleep is affected that night. By becoming aware of your caffeine dosage and how it interacts with your body, you gain control over its effects. You shift from being a passive consumer to an active participant in your mental performance. You stop using caffeine impulsively and start using it intentionally, at the right dose, at the right time for the right task. That shift alone can transform caffeine from a daily habit into a high-performance tool that serves your goals instead of hijacking your brain. Throughout the day, your brain and body go through natural cycles of alertness and fatigue that repeat roughly every 90 to 120 minutes. These cycles are called ultradian rhythms. They are a fundamental part of your biological clock, influencing everything from your focus and cognitive capacity to your mood and energy levels. Most people are familiar with the concept of circadian rhythms, the 24-hour cycle that governs sleep and wakefulness, but very few are aware that within that daily rhythm, your brain is continuously moving through these smaller repeated waves of high and low alertness. Understanding this pattern and aligning your caffeine intake with it can dramatically improve the way you focus and perform throughout the day. In each ultradian cycle, you typically experience a window of heightened focus and physical energy for about 90 minutes. After that, your body naturally shifts into a lower energy state for about 20 to 30 minutes. This is not a bug in the system, it's a feature. During that rest period, your brain processes information, consolidates memory, and resets for the next cycle of high performance. However, most people ignore this downshift. Instead of allowing the brain to rest, they push through with more stimulation, often in the form of more caffeine, more screen time, or more work. This disrupts the natural rhythm and leads to mental fatigue, burnout, and an overall decrease in cognitive performance. What makes caffeine so powerful when used properly is that it can amplify your performance during the upward swing of your ultradian rhythm. If you time your caffeine intake so that it kicks in as your body is entering a natural state of alertness, you're working with your biology rather than against it. The result is a synergistic effect. Your focus sharpens, your reaction time improves, and your ability to sustain attention is greatly enhanced. You feel more energized, not because you're overriding fatigue, but because you're augmenting a state your brain is already transitioning into. The key is knowing when these cycles begin and where you are within them. Most people start their first ultradian cycle about 90 minutes after waking. That's why delaying caffeine intake for the first hour or two after getting out of bed not only supports your cortisol rhythm, but also positions caffeine to align with the beginning of your first real performance window. When caffeine is consumed at the right time, typically just as you enter one of these periods of high focus, it enhances the release of dopamine and norepinephrine, two neurotransmitters crucial for attention and goal-directed behavior. This timing maximizes your ability to think clearly, process information, and stay locked into mentally demanding tasks. In contrast, taking caffeine during the low phase of an ultradian rhythm, when your body is signaling that it needs rest, can be counterproductive. You might feel artificially stimulated, but your cognitive abilities don't truly improve. You end up masking the fatigue rather than respecting it. Over time, this creates a pattern where you're using caffeine to patch over dips in energy that your body is naturally designed to experience and recover from. The long-term effect is more strain on the nervous system, poorer sleep at night, and reduced overall productivity during the day. By aligning caffeine with your ultradian rhythm, you also create a natural cadence to your day. You begin to notice when your brain feels sharpest and when it needs a break. You become more in tune with your body's energy cycles, which allows you to plan your most demanding work during periods of high focus and reserve less taxing tasks or short breaks for the lower energy phases. This rhythm-based approach not only improves the quality of your work, it reduces the mental fatigue that often comes from fighting your own biology. Ultimately, the goal is to use caffeine not as a blunt instrument, but as a precision tool to enhance what your body is already primed to do. When you understand and respect your ultradian rhythm, caffeine becomes a performance enhancer rather than a crutch. And that shift in approach can lead to better focus, deeper engagement, and more sustainable mental energy across the entire day. Caffeine doesn't just wake you up, it fundamentally alters the way your brain communicates. At the core of this process is dopamine, a powerful neuromodulator that plays a central role in motivation, drive, and focus. When you consume caffeine, it indirectly enhances dopamine signaling, which is one of the key reasons why it makes you feel alert, interested, and ready to take on challenges. But to truly understand how caffeine sharpens focus, you need to look beneath the surface of that initial kick you feel after a cup of coffee. The real power of caffeine lies in how it amplifies your brain's reward system and encourages goal-directed behavior. Dopamine is not a pleasure chemical as it's often mistakenly described. It's a molecule of motivation and pursuit. It's released when you anticipate achieving something meaningful, finishing a project, solving a problem, or even making progress toward a personal goal. The more dopamine activity in your brain, particularly in the prefrontal cortex and the striatum, the more motivated you feel to stay on task and ignore distractions. What caffeine does is increase the availability of dopamine receptors in these brain areas and reduce the reuptake of dopamine, meaning the signal stays active for longer. This translates into a heightened sense of engagement, a clearer sense of purpose, and an increased willingness to push through effortful work. This is incredibly important in today's environment, where distractions are constant and our attention is under siege. Your ability to maintain focus isn't just about mental discipline, it's about brain chemistry. When caffeine enhances dopamine signaling, it tips the balance in your favor. It makes it easier to lock in on what matters and tune out everything else. You don't just feel more awake, you feel more interested, and interest is a critical component of focus. If you're not interested in what you're doing, your brain has a much harder time devoting resources to it. Caffeine essentially makes your brain more responsive to the rewards of effort and progress, which strengthens the mental feedback loop that keeps you engaged. There's also a secondary but equally powerful effect of caffeine on effort-related decision-making. Dopamine doesn't just help you stay focused, it helps you decide what's worth focusing on. In situations where the task in front of you is difficult or mentally taxing, your brain subconsciously weighs the cost of the effort against the potential reward. Higher dopamine signaling, enhanced by caffeine, skews that cost-benefit analysis in your favor. It makes hard things feel more doable. You're more likely to start a challenging task, more likely to stick with it, and more likely to experience a sense of progress while doing it. That's why caffeine is often associated not just with alertness but with productivity and momentum. Another often overlooked aspect is how caffeine-induced dopamine activity supports learning. When your brain is in a heightened state of attention and motivation, it also becomes more plastic, meaning it's more capable of forming new connections and retaining information. This is especially valuable if you're trying to acquire a new skill, study a complex topic, or refine your performance in a creative or technical domain. Caffeine, when taken before focused work, doesn't just help you concentrate, it actually increases the likelihood that what you're working on will be encoded into long-term memory. It makes the learning process more efficient by enhancing the neurochemical signals that tell the brain, "This is important, pay attention to this." All of these effects are dose and timing dependent, of course. Too much caffeine can flood the system and actually disrupt dopamine signaling, leading to overstimulation, irritability, and eventually a crash that leaves you more distracted than before. But when caffeine is consumed within an optimal range and time to align with your natural rhythms, it becomes an incredibly effective amplifier of your brain's most valuable focusing mechanism. It's not about forcing yourself to pay attention, it's about enhancing the neurobiological conditions that make deep focus feel natural and rewarding. And that, more than anything, is the key to using caffeine not just as a stimulant but as a tool for sustained mental performance. One of the most critical yet commonly overlooked aspects of caffeine use is its impact on sleep, particularly the deep, restorative stages that are essential for both mental and physical recovery. Most people think about caffeine in terms of how it makes them feel in the moment: more alert, more energetic, more capable of pushing through work or fatigue. But what many don't realize is that the same compound that helps you stay awake during the day can quietly sabotage the quality of your sleep at night, even if you don't feel it happening. This is because caffeine has a long half-life, typically ranging from 5 to 7 hours in most people, and sometimes even longer depending on your genetics, age, liver metabolism, and overall sensitivity. Caffeine works by blocking adenosine receptors in the brain. Adenosine is a molecule that accumulates throughout the day, creating what's known as sleep pressure. The more adenosine that builds up, the stronger the signal to your brain and body that it's time to wind down and eventually fall asleep. When you consume caffeine, it occupies the same receptors that adenosine would normally bind to, effectively masking your sense of tiredness. This can be helpful during the day when you're trying to stay alert, but as the day progresses and your body starts to prepare for sleep, caffeine's lingering presence can become disruptive, even if you don't feel stimulated or jittery. The problem is not just falling asleep, it's the quality of sleep that caffeine interferes with. Even if you manage to drift off, caffeine can significantly reduce the amount of deep, slow-wave sleep you get. This is the phase of sleep most associated with brain recovery, immune system support, and memory consolidation. It's during deep sleep that your brain performs critical housekeeping functions, such as clearing out metabolic waste products like beta amyloid, which have been linked to neurodegenerative diseases when allowed to accumulate. If caffeine is still active in your system, it blunts the depth of this restorative process, leading to shallower, more fragmented sleep that leaves you feeling less refreshed in the morning, even if you technically got a full 8 hours. This becomes a vicious cycle. Poor quality sleep increases your reliance on caffeine the following day, which then affects your sleep that night, and so on. Over time, this pattern can erode your baseline energy levels, reduce cognitive performance, increase stress hormones, and impair emotional regulation. Many people find themselves trapped in this loop without realizing caffeine is the culprit. They feel tired in the morning, drink more coffee to compensate, push through the day, sleep poorly again, and repeat. It becomes a self-reinforcing dependency that feels like a solution but actually undermines long-term performance and well-being. The best way to avoid this is by being strategic about the timing of your caffeine consumption. A general rule supported by sleep science is to stop ingesting caffeine at least 8 to 10 hours before you plan to go to sleep. So if your bedtime is around 10 p.m., your last cup of coffee should ideally be no later than 2 p.m., and even earlier if you're particularly sensitive. This window allows your body to metabolize and clear a significant portion of the caffeine, so that by the time you're winding down for the evening, your brain is no longer experiencing the artificial wakefulness that caffeine promotes. It's also worth noting that sleep disruption from caffeine is not always consciously noticeable. You might think you're sleeping fine because you fall asleep quickly and don't wake up during the night, but if you consistently feel groggy in the morning, or rely on stimulants just to feel baseline alertness, there's a good chance your sleep depth is being compromised. Over time, this low-grade sleep debt accumulates and begins to show up in subtle but important ways: lower productivity, reduced creativity, increased impulsivity, and greater emotional volatility. The most effective way to use caffeine is to front-load it earlier in the day, during the hours when your natural cortisol rhythm is already supporting wakefulness. In doing so, you align your stimulant use with your body's natural biology and preserve the integrity of your sleep later in the evening. That simple shift, being aware of caffeine's long half-life and cutting it off early enough, can dramatically improve your sleep quality, which in turn enhances your cognitive function, mood stability, and overall health. Sleep is not just a passive state, it is one of the most powerful cognitive enhancers available. Caffeine should be used in a way that supports, rather than undermines, that essential biological process. When you get your timing right, caffeine becomes a powerful ally in sharpening your focus without costing you the recovery your brain and body desperately need. Caffeine is often associated with instant energy, but what many people don't realize is that its effects are not immediate. There is a delay between the moment you consume caffeine and the moment it reaches peak effectiveness in your system. On average, caffeine takes about 30 to 45 minutes to reach its maximum concentration in the bloodstream, and that delay has major implications for how and when you should use it. If your goal is to improve focus and mental performance, understanding this timing allows you to use caffeine not just reactively, when you already feel tired or distracted, but proactively, so that it kicks in just as you're entering a phase of deep mental effort. The delayed onset of caffeine means that most people are mistiming their consumption. They often reach for a cup of coffee or an energy drink the moment they sit down to work, expecting to feel sharper and more focused immediately. But because caffeine takes time to be absorbed and distributed throughout the body and brain, this expectation doesn't match what's actually happening. During that initial period, you may still feel sluggish or unfocused, leading people to mistakenly believe they need more caffeine or that it's not working fast enough. As a result, they may overconsume it or layer it with additional stimulants, both of which can lead to overstimulation, jitteriness, and a subsequent crash. If instead you consume caffeine approximately 30 to 60 minutes before a high-focus task, you're aligning its peak effect with the time you actually need it most. This proactive approach allows you to enter a state of deep concentration right when your cognitive demands are at their highest. For example, if you know you need to write a report, study for an exam, or engage in a creative project at 10 a.m., having your caffeine at around 9:15 to 9:30 a.m. ensures that by the time you're diving into your most important work, your brain is primed with the neurochemical support it needs: more dopamine, more norepinephrine, and heightened cortical activation. You're not chasing focus, you're setting the stage for it in advance. Another factor to consider is how this delayed effect interacts with your natural circadian and ultradian rhythms. Your brain tends to follow a wave-like pattern of alertness and fatigue throughout the day, and if you time your caffeine intake too late, you might find yourself wide awake during periods when your body naturally wants to wind down. This is especially problematic when caffeine is consumed reactively in the afternoon, in response to an energy slump. In reality, that slump may just be the natural low point of an ultradian cycle, a phase where your body and brain are designed to reset. But if you drink caffeine during that period, thinking it will give you a quick energy lift, you may be disrupting a necessary rhythm and throwing off your energy for the rest of the day. The delay also becomes crucial when caffeine is used before exercise or public performance. For athletes, speakers, or performers who want a heightened sense of readiness, the best time to take caffeine is about 45 minutes beforehand. This ensures that the physiological effects, such as increased adrenaline release, improved muscle contractility, and heightened mental focus, are synchronized with the moment of execution. Similarly, if you're using caffeine to support endurance or sustain concentration in long work sessions, you can time your intake in waves, spacing out lower doses in a way that maintains effectiveness without creating a sharp spike followed by a crash. It's important to remember that caffeine doesn't work like a light switch. It's more like a volume knob that gradually turns up the signal over time. Your body needs time to digest and absorb it, your blood needs to circulate it to the brain, and your neurons need time to respond to the blocked adenosine and elevated dopamine levels. By respecting this process and planning for it, you can use caffeine with far more precision. Instead of chasing energy, you can anticipate your needs and time your intake accordingly, which results in a smoother, more sustained focus that feels natural and manageable rather than forced and erratic. This small shift in awareness from consuming caffeine reactively to using it strategically with timing in mind can make an enormous difference. It allows you to get the most benefit from each dose, avoid unnecessary overstimulation, and synchronize your cognitive peak with your most important tasks. That's the essence of high-performance behavior, not doing more, but doing it smarter. Caffeine becomes a true cognitive ally not when you take it to wake up, but when you time it to show up when you need it most. There's a common belief that caffeine's primary role is to act as a stimulant to wake you up, keep you going, and help you push through tiredness. While that's partially true, one of the most powerful yet underappreciated ways caffeine supports focus and performance is by enhancing physical movement. Caffeine doesn't just stimulate the brain in isolation, it also stimulates the body. It activates the sympathetic nervous system, increases adrenaline levels, and improves motor coordination, which is why it's widely used by athletes to boost endurance, strength, and reaction time. But what's often overlooked is how this increased capacity for physical movement can be leveraged to elevate mental focus as well. There is a deeply interconnected relationship between physical movement and cognitive performance. When you move your body, whether it's walking, standing, light stretching, or even subtle fidgeting, you increase blood flow to the brain, elevate oxygen delivery, and stimulate the release of key neurotransmitters such as dopamine, serotonin, and norepinephrine. These are the very same neurochemicals that caffeine amplifies, so when caffeine is combined with even modest physical activity, there's a compounding effect. Your brain becomes more alert, your attention sharpens, and your working memory capacity expands. You're not just more awake, you're more capable of sustained high-quality mental output. This synergy is especially evident in practices like movement breaks or walking while thinking. If you've ever felt stuck while trying to solve a problem, then stood up and paced around the room or took a walk and suddenly found clarity, that's not coincidence, it's neuroscience in action. Adding caffeine to that movement increases the likelihood that your brain will enter a focused creative state more rapidly. The physical act of moving engages large muscle groups and activates neural circuits involved in planning and attention. When you overlay caffeine onto this system, you boost the efficiency of those circuits. Your mind becomes more organized, your thoughts more linear, and your ability to switch between ideas or maintain concentration becomes easier. This is one reason why consuming caffeine before exercise or any form of intentional movement, like a brisk walk, stretching session, or even standing up to work at a desk, can be an excellent strategy to prime the brain. You're effectively syncing your physical and mental systems to operate at their best, and unlike purely sedentary caffeine consumption, which may lead to nervous energy or restlessness, pairing caffeine with movement gives that energy a clear direction. It gets channeled into productive action rather than being trapped in a restless or jittery state. In fact, using caffeine before a walk can serve as a powerful tool to initiate focused work. Instead of drinking coffee and immediately diving into a task, try this: consume your caffeine, wait about 10 to 15 minutes, and then go for a 10-minute walk. This light movement accelerates caffeine's absorption and distribution throughout the body and begins activating your neuromuscular and attentional systems. By the time you return to your desk, your brain will be firing at a high level, and you'll be physiologically primed to enter a state of deep concentration. It's a ritual that doesn't just rely on chemical stimulation, but integrates behavior and biology to create an optimal internal environment for focus. Furthermore, movement also helps regulate the potential downsides of caffeine. Some people experience anxiety or jitteriness after consuming it, especially in high doses or on an empty stomach. Light movement can mitigate these effects by providing a physical outlet for the stimulation. It disperses excess energy, helps stabilize blood sugar levels, and calms the nervous system in a paradoxical but effective way. Essentially, movement smooths out the edges of the caffeine experience and makes its benefits more usable. The link between caffeine, movement, and focus isn't just a casual association, it's a powerful science-backed principle that can transform how you approach your mental work. When caffeine enhances your willingness to move, and that movement in turn enhances your ability to think, you enter a feedback loop of productive energy. Your body supports your brain, and your brain guides your body toward intentional effort. The result is greater clarity, resilience, and output with less friction. In today's highly sedentary world, this insight is more important than ever. We're often trying to solve cognitive problems while sitting completely still, disconnected from the physical systems that could be supporting our mental performance. Caffeine can serve as a bridge, activating the body just enough to make light movement feel natural, which then catalyzes sharper, more sustained thinking. It's not just about drinking coffee to stay awake, it's about using caffeine strategically to reconnect the mind and body, unlock your full attentional potential, and bring a sense of momentum to the work that matters most. Caffeine is often treated as a one-size-fits-all solution for boosting energy and focus, but the truth is that individual sensitivity to caffeine varies dramatically from person to person. This sensitivity isn't just about how much caffeine you can handle without feeling jittery, it's deeply tied to your genetics, your habitual intake, your liver's ability to metabolize caffeine, your sleep history, and even your current stress levels. All of these factors play a crucial role in determining how caffeine will affect your mood, your alertness, and your ability to concentrate. What works wonders for one person might create anxiety, restlessness, or even cognitive impairment in someone else. The idea that more caffeine always means more productivity is a myth, and understanding your personal response is essential if you want to use caffeine effectively and sustainably. At the core of this variability is a gene known as C1A2, which determines how quickly your liver metabolizes caffeine. Some people are fast metabolizers, meaning they break down caffeine quickly and clear it from their system faster. For these individuals, moderate to even high doses of caffeine can be tolerated with minimal side effects. In contrast, slow metabolizers process caffeine more gradually, which causes it to linger in the body longer. In these individuals, even a modest cup of coffee can lead to prolonged stimulation, disrupted sleep, and feelings of nervousness or unease. Importantly, this isn't something you can train your way out of. It's hardwired into your biology, and while you can adjust your habits, you can't change your metabolic rate at will. Beyond genetics, habitual consumption also shapes your sensitivity. If you drink caffeine regularly, your body will adapt by altering the number and sensitivity of adenosine receptors in the brain. This means that over time, you may need more caffeine to achieve the same level of alertness. This tolerance can reduce caffeine's effectiveness and even create a dependency cycle where you feel you need caffeine just to reach baseline energy levels. But if you stop using caffeine for a while, what scientists call a caffeine reset, those receptors recalibrate, and your sensitivity can return. This is why some people cycle their caffeine use or intentionally take caffeine-free days to maintain its potency and avoid adaptation. There are also significant variations based on body size, hormone levels, hydration, and whether or not you consume caffeine with food. For instance, caffeine consumed on an empty stomach is absorbed more quickly and can lead to a sharper, more intense stimulant effect. This may be helpful for some, but it can be overwhelming or even counterproductive for others. Conversely, consuming caffeine with a meal slows its absorption and can buffer against unwanted spikes in energy or mood. Women, especially those taking hormonal birth control, tend to metabolize caffeine more slowly, which can further intensify its effects or extend its duration well into the evening hours, potentially impacting sleep. Sleep deprivation is another critical variable. If you're well rested, a small dose of caffeine can give you a noticeable and helpful edge. But if you're running on very little sleep, caffeine may feel less effective, or worse, it might give you the illusion of functioning while actually masking deeper cognitive deficits. In sleep-deprived states, people tend to make more impulsive decisions, have slower reaction times, and perform worse on memory tasks, even if they feel subjectively more alert thanks to caffeine. That's why using caffeine as a band-aid for chronic sleep loss is risky. It can lead to overconfidence in your cognitive performance, while your actual capability is compromised. Stress and emotional state also influence how caffeine feels and functions. If you're already in a heightened stress state, such as before an important meeting or during a high-pressure deadline, caffeine can push your arousal past the optimal threshold. Rather than sharpening your focus, it can increase anxiety, muscle tension, and racing thoughts, especially in slow metabolizers or people prone to anxiety. On the other hand, if you're in a calm or slightly drowsy state, caffeine may lift you into the ideal arousal zone for focus and problem solving. This is known as the Yerkes-Dodson law. There's a sweet spot where arousal enhances performance, but too much arousal begins to impair it. Caffeine doesn't guarantee a lift into that zone, it just shifts your arousal level, and where that lands you depends on your baseline. Understanding your own response to caffeine requires self-awareness and experimentation. Pay attention not just to how caffeine makes you feel in the moment, but how it impacts your performance across a full day. Track your sleep quality, your mood, your level of mental clarity, and how easily you can sustain focus after consuming caffeine. Notice how the timing and dose affect you. Do you feel sharp and productive after 100 milligrams, or do you need closer to 200? Do you crash later in the day, or does your focus stay steady? Are there days when caffeine makes you feel edgy instead of energized? These are important data points that help you refine your caffeine strategy. The ultimate goal is to find your personal caffeine sweet spot, the dose, timing, and delivery method that reliably enhances your attention without creating side effects or dependency. For some, that might be a single espresso in the morning. For others, it might be 2 smaller doses spaced throughout the day. The only way to know is to observe yourself carefully and adjust accordingly. Caffeine is a powerful cognitive tool, but like any tool, it requires precision. When you tailor it to your own biology and lifestyle, it becomes not just a source of stimulation, but a highly effective ally in the pursuit of mental clarity, consistency, and high performance. Caffeine's primary mechanism of action in the brain is through its interaction with a molecule called adenosine. To truly understand how caffeine sharpens focus and boosts mental performance, it's essential to understand how this relationship works. Adenosine is a neuromodulator that accumulates in your brain over the course of the day. As your waking hours progress, adenosine levels rise, binding to specific receptors in the brain and signaling to your body that it's time to slow down, rest, or prepare for sleep. This accumulation is part of your brain's natural fatigue system, an internal gauge that builds pressure to rest the longer you stay awake. What caffeine does is block those adenosine receptors. It doesn't stop the production of adenosine itself, but it occupies the receptor sites in the brain, preventing adenosine from binding and exerting its effects. As a result, your brain perceives less fatigue even though adenosine is still present and accumulating in the background. This creates a feeling of alertness and wakefulness because the normal slow-down signals are muted. In a sense, caffeine hijacks your brain's fatigue signaling system and gives you temporary relief from the sensation of tiredness, allowing you to maintain a higher level of attention and focus than you might otherwise be able to achieve in a low-energy state. But this process is more than just masking fatigue. It also amplifies several key neurochemical systems associated with motivation and cognition. By blocking adenosine, caffeine indirectly increases the activity of dopamine and norepinephrine, two neurotransmitters critical to focus, attention, and the regulation of mood. Dopamine enhances your sense of motivation and reward, giving you a stronger drive to complete tasks, while norepinephrine sharpens alertness and helps maintain mental clarity under stress. These neurochemical changes create a brain state that is not just more awake, but more capable of sustaining prolonged effort, resisting distraction, and operating with increased precision and speed. However, because adenosine is still building up in the background, this delayed fatigue catches up eventually. When the caffeine wears off and unblocks the adenosine receptors, all the built-up adenosine floods in at once. This is often experienced as a crash several hours later, the sudden return of tiredness sometimes accompanied by irritability or brain fog. The intensity of this crash depends on how much caffeine was consumed, how long it lasted in the body, and how sleep-deprived the person was before ingesting it. Essentially, caffeine doesn't erase the need for rest, it just postpones the brain's natural signals that you're tired. If used repeatedly without adequate recovery, this can lead to a cycle of over-reliance, where caffeine is needed just to feel baseline levels of alertness. That's why the timing and dosage of caffeine matters so much. Consuming it earlier in the day allows the brain ample time to metabolize both the caffeine and the accumulated adenosine by nightfall, reducing the risk of sleep disruption. If you consume caffeine too late, especially within 6 to 8 hours of bedtime, it can prevent the reactivation of adenosine signaling at the time you most need it, when your body is trying to wind down and prepare for sleep. Even if you're able to fall asleep, the quality of that sleep may be reduced, particularly in the deeper, more restorative stages. That leads to insufficient recovery, greater adenosine buildup the next day, and an even stronger perceived need for caffeine. It's a loop that can erode both cognitive performance and overall health, if not managed carefully. Furthermore, the way caffeine interacts with adenosine offers an opportunity for strategic use. For instance, delaying your first dose of caffeine by 90 to 120 minutes after waking allows the body to naturally clear the residual adenosine from the sleep cycle. This enhances your energy regulation throughout the day and prevents unnecessary buildup or tolerance to caffeine early on. If you immediately block adenosine upon waking, you may not give your system enough time to flush out what's left from sleep, and that can blunt the energizing effect of caffeine later in the day. So ironically, waiting a bit before your first cup can actually make caffeine work better when you do take it. This interaction between caffeine and adenosine is one of the most elegant examples of how a simple molecule can powerfully shape our perception, behavior, and performance. Caffeine doesn't create energy, it alters the brain's communication about energy. By modulating the fatigue signal, it allows us to extend our cognitive and physical capacities temporarily. When used intentionally, with awareness of how it works and how your body responds to it, caffeine becomes a powerful tool to support focus, sustain attention, and unlock mental performance, especially when aligned with the body's natural rhythms and balanced with adequate recovery. One of the most important considerations when using caffeine to improve focus is how it interacts with your overall daily rhythm, particularly your natural sleep-wake cycle and circadian biology. Your brain and body operate on intricate internal clocks that regulate everything from hormone release to body temperature, alertness, and cognitive function. These rhythms are finely tuned by millions of years of evolution to optimize your performance at specific times of day and to ensure restorative processes occur at night. When you consume caffeine, you're introducing a powerful stimulant that can both support and disrupt these rhythms, depending on how and when it's used. Understanding this dynamic is critical for harnessing caffeine's benefits without unintentionally sabotaging your natural biological processes. The circadian rhythm governs your alertness levels throughout the day. For most people, alertness rises sharply in the morning after waking, peaks mid-morning to early afternoon, dips in the early afternoon, often called the post-lunch dip, and then gradually declines toward evening as melatonin secretion increases to prepare your body for sleep. When caffeine is consumed in alignment with these natural peaks and troughs, it can augment your natural alertness by boosting neurotransmitters involved in attention and arousal. For example, a moderate dose of caffeine mid-morning can amplify your cognitive performance during a natural peak, helping you sustain focus and productivity. Likewise, a small amount during the early afternoon dip can counteract the temporary decrease in alertness without pushing you into overstimulation. However, when caffeine is consumed too late in the day, or in excessive amounts, it can interfere with the evening processes that prepare your brain for sleep. Caffeine blocks adenosine receptors, and as we discussed, adenosine is a key signal that builds up during waking hours to promote sleepiness. If caffeine blocks this signal in the evening, your brain doesn't receive the time to rest message as clearly, delaying the release of melatonin and pushing back your natural sleep onset. Even if you feel tired, the quality of your sleep can be degraded, less deep sleep, more awakenings, and diminished restoration. This creates a vicious cycle. Poor sleep increases adenosine buildup the following day, causing daytime fatigue, which you then try to combat with more caffeine, further disrupting your rhythm. Aligning caffeine intake with your circadian rhythm requires paying attention to your personal sleep-wake patterns and lifestyle. For many people, this means avoiding caffeine at least 6 to 8 hours before bedtime, and sometimes even earlier if you're particularly sensitive. For example, if you aim to go to bed around 10 p.m., having caffeine after 2 p.m. might reduce sleep quality. But this window varies. Some metabolize caffeine quickly and can tolerate later consumption with minimal impact, while others, especially those who metabolize caffeine slowly or have sleep difficulties, need to cut off caffeine earlier. Recognizing your unique pattern is key to balancing the cognitive benefits of caffeine with healthy sleep. Beyond timing, the circadian rhythm also influences how caffeine feels on different days. If you're jet-lagged, pulling an all-nighter, or experiencing irregular sleep schedules, your internal clock may be misaligned. In these states, caffeine's effects can be unpredictable. It might help temporarily, but it can also exacerbate circadian misalignment and impair recovery. For instance, shift workers who consume caffeine to stay awake during nighttime shifts often experience poorer overall health and cognitive function because their caffeine use conflicts with their disrupted biological rhythms. Thus, caffeine's ability to improve focus depends not just on the amount consumed, but on its relationship with your underlying circadian biology. Integrating caffeine use into your daily rhythm also involves recognizing natural periods of low and high energy within your ultradian cycles. These are shorter cycles of about 90 to 120 minutes, during which your body alternates between peaks of alertness and troughs of relative fatigue. Using caffeine to time into these peaks can enhance focus more effectively than trying to force alertness during troughs. For example, taking caffeine just before entering a natural alertness peak amplifies your brain's readiness to engage, whereas using it during a trough without movement or break might not be as effective and could contribute to overstimulation and a subsequent crash. Lastly, it's important to consider that the benefits of caffeine on focus are not solely a chemical reaction, but also psychological. When you use caffeine in a way that aligns with your natural rhythms, it supports a sense of flow and engagement. This harmony between internal biology and external stimulant use makes focus feel easier, more sustainable, and less effortful. You're not fighting your body's signals, you're working with them, which creates a more balanced and effective approach to productivity. In sum, caffeine is a powerful tool that can boost focus and cognitive performance, but its effectiveness is deeply intertwined with your body's internal timing systems. By respecting your circadian rhythm, avoiding late-day caffeine, and tuning into your natural energy cycles, you can maximize the benefits of caffeine while protecting your sleep and overall well-being. This alignment is the key to turning caffeine from a blunt instrument into a precise, intelligent enhancer of mental clarity and sustained focus.